So let's now go to our final guest of the evening. It's got, of course, Nick Tulloch, the CEO of ECR Minerals. Nick, thank you for your time. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Mark. How are you?
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Very good. Thank you for joining us this evening from where you are. So we've got a few things to talk about, but the most advanced asset in ECR's portfolio is, of course, Blue Mountain, which is where you are currently preparing to commence commercial gold production. So let's just start. Give us some background to this project and why you can get into that small scale production relatively easily.
Sure. Well, Blue Mountain is an alluvial gold prospect, so a waterborne resource. I was there about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I guess one of my sort of overriding thoughts is that I suppose to a UK listener or UK viewer, we think of sort of large rivers, we think of, sort of single streams. Yeah, in fact, Blue Mountain is a whole series of gullies. I mean, the clue's in the word. It's a mountain. It's a very undulating landscape, but it's 12.5 square kilometers of a series of gullies, and you can see up and down the mountains the historic workings that have gone on, which I always find vaguely reassuring. And that if other people are there, you get the confidence that there's there's a good reason to be in the region yourself. So we're going to start a process during the course of the coming months to bring that into production, and it will be a gravity-fed process, fairly low technology that will see us trenching down these gullies or down the side of the gullies, and separating the gold from the remaining ground through a gravity process.
Okay. And if we just think, you mentioned there about sort of explaining what it looks like to perhaps a UK audience. We probably do have some people tuning in from North America as well. But a mountain like this, or more sort of flat.
No,
You said over 12 square kilometers. So what's the terrain like?
more sort of undulating landscapes.
Okay.
The reason I start with the description is, from I suppose from in my head before I was there, it was far smaller scale. It was far flatter. It was going to be a single form of water source. Yeah, actually, what you've got is a series of hills. I mean, not just one, a series of hills. Blue Mountain is a mountain just next door to our tenement. You've got a series of hills where gullies run down the side of the hills. We put a few photos on social media for those who follow us. And as the gullies sort of wind down the hills, we can see there's been historic workings for gold alongside those gullies. And that's, broadly speaking, exactly what we're going to do. We're going to apply a little bit of modern technology. We will use some ground penetration radar to make sure we're in the right location. We will do an overhead survey with drones to make sure we've got a very good understanding of the landscape. But broadly speaking, it's a case of trenching down the side of these gullies.
Right. Okay. So that's what it'll look like, effectively trenching. Which is, I've seen it done. It's just quite simple, isn't it? So just an excavator digging a trench, effectively, and then you'll take samples.
We've done the sampling, so it's more about. I think the next stage is more about testing the ability to bulk process.
Okay.
So we did some sampling back in the summer. We used a Victoria-based firm called Gecko, who I think are probably one of the world leaders in examining resources such as this. And where we've got to now is, as I say, a bit of ground penetration radar. What we want to make sure of is where the bedrock is. When we were sampling back in the summer of last year, or our summer of last year, we never really went down more than 4 meters. And actually, the best results were probably in the first 2 of those meters. So the ground penetration radar will show us where the bedrock sits under the ground. The overhead drone survey will give us a much better perspective of the landscape as a whole. There will be some further testing, which is more about making sure that the bulk processing works as planned. And I suppose the next major event on my list anyway is to get a wash plant commissioned. Now, we had a very small wash plant we were using for the testing. What we're anticipating is having a wash plant that could process at least 25 tons per hour, maybe a little bit more, or maybe we have 2 wash plants going at the same time. You can buy these wash plants off the shelf, you can buy them secondhand, but they need to be configured to suit the ground conditions. A lot of them are made, for example, in Western Australia, where you've got a slightly different soil composition. What we want to make sure is that the clay that exists around Blue Mountain isn't going to stick to the gold, and we produce a lot of clay and not so much gold. So there's a little bit of work to be done on the wash plant, but I sort of dress it up all I like. This is a fairly straightforward process.
Okay. And forgive the simple question, but a wash plant simply washes away the easy to wash away stuff like soils and clays to leave you with the stuff you want, the harder stuff.
Yeah, if you imagine a sort of so I get my hands in the right place. If you imagine a funnel at one end where we will literally use an excavator or a bulldozer to tip in the ground, so we're talking about 25 tons per hour. The wash plant is then a spinning cylinder that has a series of holes that will extract the finer particles. There's then a gravity system that will then bring the gold to the bottom. As I say, I'd love to dress it up as a slightly more sophisticated process, but the beauty of an alluvial resource and the beauty of what we can do at Blue Mountain is it is very straightforward. We're only going down 4 meters maximum. This is not sort of drilling 100 meters into the Earth's core and see what we find. Yeah, it's very much a surface operation.
Okay, and you've mentioned sort of the beauty of alluvial a couple of times there. So alluvial, as far as I understand that, does it mean that it's the mineralization, the gold is sort of just it's kind of here, it's kind of sporadic, it's not necessarily in a vein or in a huge deposit. It's sort of in some cases lying at surface, but kind of dotted around. Is that right?
Yes, it's fairly widespread, and also the particles can be very, very small. I mean, so much so that you're not necessarily visible to the naked eye. This is not sort of chipping away at the rock and finding a large nugget and sort of hold it up to your friends and look what we've got. This is about finding a large quantity of very small particles of gold. I mean, to try and put it into context, our modelling, we're always very conservative in the modelling. Our modelling assumes 0.6 grams per bank cubic meter. So cubic meter of earth, 0.6 grams of gold. That's the level we're predicting. Now, again, just to set that in context, we had much higher results in some of the testing, but going back through some of the historical workings and, again, just being conservative, that's what we're assuming. So we put out an RNS earlier this month, and we indicated that at that level of gold, so at 0.6 grams per bank cubic meter, and at 25 tons per hour, if that's the wash plant we go for, we could be doing revenue of a little under 500,000 Australian dollars per month. I mean, that gives you an idea of the scale of the opportunity before us.
Okay, about 500 per month. Okay, that gives
just a bit under 500, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what you sort of back of the napkin sort of calculations there.
Yeah, a bit more than a napkin, but
Sure.
yes, it's until you get started, everything is a projection, and so we've kept it fairly modest. Yeah, okay. So that's at 25 tons per hour. Okay. That's one wash plant. Now, of course, you can scale up over the size of the territory we've got. You could have 2 teams, you could have 2 wash plants. You can start increasing that tonnage. Okay. The one thing we probably have to watch out for is water. Sounds slightly sort of contradictory for a northern hemisphere audience, but although it's an alluvial resource, we are talking about Australia here. Water resources are fairly scarce. You need around about equivalent volumes of water per tonnage of ground that you process. Now we can recover the water, and we will recover the water. So it's not quite as extreme as I just described, but that'll probably be the main limiting factor as to how much we can do. But as I say, we're targeting 25 tons per hour, and that's where I got the just under $500,000 a month, Australian dollars.
And that's why it's so good just to go and dig these trenches, because you effectively just scoop up the earth and drop it into the plant, and it processes through. So it's just really small bits of gold effectively, but you just scoop it up, drop it in, and out comes the gold effectively.
Yeah. In the past, I've sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek described it as panning for gold on an industrial scale. So we're not the first people here, and you can see around the fields, other people have gone for a similar process. And there's various pits dug in certain places, but going back some years, I suppose the old timers, if that's the right word for them, they'd be going for what they can see, and what we're targeting with an almost 92% recovery rate, and that was proven by Gecko in our testing last year, an almost 92% recovery rate. We're also picking up what the naked eye is not necessarily going to see. So that's my panning for gold on an industrial scale.
Sure. I mean, does the project offer any other upside beyond the alluvial gold potential through further exploration, or is this really alluvial, sort of small scale, easy revenues?
In our modelling, we've assumed it's the latter. It's an alluvial resource, but the gold has to come from somewhere. And something I did with the team when I was out there is we did climb the hill. We've gone to where we think maybe the gold began. I mean, it has to come from somewhere. And we found some quite interesting rock samples. We actually put them in for testing. Um, it's quite possible there's some other minerals there. I mean, we're not going to know for
Okay.
sure. We're not going to know quantities, but just from what we saw on the structures, and again we saw historical workings. I mean, right at the top of the hill, someone has dug a mine shaft, so there's been something there in the past. I mean, you know, the records are long since destroyed. That would be a bonus. I mean, our assumption is this is gold only. There's nothing else we're going to come across, but the acreage is quite significant, and if we can
Okay.
find further opportunities, further minerals, clearly it would be remiss of us not to look at them quite carefully.
Indeed. So, I mean, how are the preparations going then for production here at Blue Mountain? What sort of time frames are we looking at? I know it's always a tough question, and of course revenues, but what time frames are we looking at for revenues to potentially begin?
Um, I suppose the answer is we're looking at months. I'm always loath to give an exact answer because we're sort of held to it, and then
Yeah.
and then punished if we you know, if there's any changes. But it's the message is it's not a complicated task. What we would like to do, and this really came out of the site visit from a few weeks ago, we would like to do an aerial survey. We would like to do a GPR survey as well. That will give us a much better idea of where to dig. I mean, the worst thing we could do is just turn up on site with an excavator and just start digging trenches and hoping for the best. I mean, that's clearly a waste of time and a waste of money.
Sure.
So preparation will make the project far more efficient and far more successful. I'm very confident of that.
Okay.
Whilst we're doing those surveys, we will commission and have this wash plant built. As I say, the toss up at the moment is, do we start from scratch and build one to our own specification? Do we buy one off the shelf, so to speak, and modify it? Yeah, if I had to call it, I'd probably say the latter is maybe the slight favourite at the moment. But it's about getting it. Well, it's about getting it right first time. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
maybe a sort of $50,000 plus piece of equipment. We don't want to drag it all the way out to Blue Mountain and realize we've got the spec wrong, and it's not going to separate the
Sure.
well, the gold from everything else.
But that discussion, that thought's going on now. The procurement process has started, has it? The planning
Oh
process?
no, it started. We've already identified suppliers of
Okay.
wash plants. We've already identified people who can build one from scratch. We're probably better connected in Victoria, so in terms of the building from scratch, and we do have a yard down in Victoria as well. I think probably the temptation will be to do that there.
Okay.
If we take one off the shelf, the bigger suppliers are in Western Australia. No surprise there, given their resources. There's also a few available secondhand in the northern part of Queensland as well. And yeah, I often say to people, I'm a Scot. I'm allergic to spending money. Yeah, if we can find one up in northern Queensland that's going to suit our purpose and we can amend or configure, then we'll certainly do that. Again, this is about getting it right, and the
Sure.
temptation is rush out on Monday morning, buy a wash plant, wing a drone over it, and hope for the best. Yeah, I would rather take a couple of months and make sure we've got the locations right, got the team in
Okay.
place, and the team will be absolutely critical here. We're probably looking at having about 4 people on site at any one time.
Okay.
Having a good site manager will determine the success of the operation. So again, you're rushing into it,
Yeah.
picking 4 guys up from the local pub. Yeah, we'll get into production, but we'll probably produce nothing at all. So, having the right team, the right equipment, and the right location, that's the task
Yeah.
over the next few weeks.
No, good. Well, it sounds like you're taking it seriously, yeah, and having a good site manager, particularly, of course, you don't live there. We're very far away over in Europe here, and of course, the co-director Mike as well. You're not on the ground, so putting good
Exactly.
people in place, a good site manager, like I say, I think is very important. But that sounds really good. So that, in theory, means that within the next sort of perhaps 2 to 3 months, we could be talking, and you'd be getting equipment sort of arriving on site.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of equipment, quite possibly sooner than that. In terms of the surveys, definitely sooner than that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think investors should predict a fair amount of news flow over the coming
Okay.
weeks and coming months as we start putting these plans into place. And
Okay.
as I say, I'd like to dress it up and say it's incredibly complex and this is cutting edge technology. It's not really. I think to do it at this scale, I think is clever, and we've employed Gecko to make sure we get it right. But in terms of looking for gold through alluvial resources, this has been done for many centuries.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Nick. I know we want to talk about another couple of things before we go to the Q&A. So let's just talk about Lolworth then, where you're advancing discussions with contractors for a proposed maiden drilling campaign. So could you tell us a bit about what you found at the project and indeed, of course, what you hope to find through the drilling?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if Blue Mountain is big, and it was certainly big to my eyes, Lolworth is a totally different scale. I mean, this is our biggest single tenement. Over the last couple of years, we've done a number of different programs there, looking at rock sampling, looking at stream sampling. We've actually made an announcement just last week on the latest results. And what we're getting consistently is very positive findings, particularly actually in our announcement earlier this month. Where we're getting to is, if anything, an extension of where we think the opportunity is in Lolworth. Now, Lolworth is predominantly a gold resource or a gold prospect. We have had rare earths there as well. We've got a couple of partnerships in place. The drilling is going to be primarily aimed at proving up that gold resource that we believe exists there. It's going to be a shallow drilling campaign. It will be RC drilling. We did a diamond drilling campaign at Tambo recently. This is one of our projects in Victoria. This will be an RC campaign. Probably quite a lot of quite shallow holes. That's what we think the geology at Lolworth merits.
Okay, and when do you think or hope to be able to doing that drill? And then, of course, the results from those drills.
It's back on predicting timings.
Always is.
I would say in the first half of this year. So
Okay.
Lolworth is further north than Blue Mountain, and in the northern part of Queensland, it's really not possible, or certainly not sensible, to be conducting work with heavy machinery during the rainy months.
Okay.
So round about sort of November to March, you wouldn't want to be taking sort of heavy drilling equipment up into that region. So that sort of takes us at least another sort of 4 or 6 weeks out, and then I think once we're in out of the rains, we'll start looking at getting a drilling team up there. We've already started talking to prospective contractors. I think we've earmarked one that we're happy with. It'll be a case of fitting in with their diary as well. But a little bit like Blue Mountain, we're talking months. Blue Mountain and Lolworth, they're in the same state. I mean, Queensland. I think you could probably fit the whole of the UK into Queensland without touching the sides. But what we will do, particularly with our geologist team, is split them between working in Blue Mountain and working in Lolworth. So, for example, I mentioned we'd been doing some bulk sampling at Blue Mountain before we really get going. It may make sense to perform that bulk sampling. The geologist, which is Adam Jones, can head on to Lolworth up to the drilling campaign there whilst we wait for the results on the bulk sampling. These are just ideas. We'll see how the timing goes, but we'll try and use the time sensibly for the team, so we're not going backwards and forwards too much.
Okay, and Lolworth is a very different project to Blue Mountain. What would a successful drilling campaign look like?
I suppose simply it would find gold.
Yes,
but
very simply, you would hit gold. Yes. Yeah.
Lolworth is a much earlier stage resource. There again, there's been historical activity, but nothing like what we've seen at Blue Mountain. The work we've done at Lolworth over the past couple of years has shown there is a high level of prospectivity for gold. The rock sampling, stream sampling I mentioned earlier has shown that. We believe it's relatively close to the surface, and so a large number of shallow holes will hopefully give us an indication of the depth and breadth of that resource that we believe sits there. So as we did, I suppose, in Victoria last year, we did some a percussion drilling in Creswick, and that was at 2 locations. This is going to be fairly similar, although not quite the same depth, and we'll use the time therefore to put in more holes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, Nick. We are on time for the Q&A, and I do see some questions coming in, and on the Telegram group as well, which I'm just keeping an eye on my phone. But let's just go for this one here. Are you still targeting disposal of MGA? That's, of course, those famous tax losses by the end of February.
Yes, I mean, over the last few months, I think we've been seen as a sort of a company with tax losses than a sort of small gold prospect on the side. We tend to see ourselves as the opposite. I mean, just for those who aren't familiar with it, MGA is a subsidiary we have in Australia. It's actually the subsidiary we carry out most of our operations in. It has been around for the best part of 20 years and has accumulated $75 million of tax losses. previous management teams at ECR have made an attempt to sell those tax losses. It hasn't really gone to plan. Where we've got to, and perhaps we've done it slightly differently, we are in talks with a group called Octo. They're a private company based in Australia. They have other projects that would be suitable for matching up with those tax losses. And the target, specified by Octo actually, the target for Octo is to complete this by the end of February. So we're sort of hurtling towards that fairly quickly. I always stress to people this is an unbelievably complicated transaction. M&A has its own complexity. Just buying and selling companies has always has unexpected items. When you're dealing with tax losses and therefore you're dealing with the Australian tax revenue service, you've got an exponential level of complexity on the top. I'm really pleased with how the discussions are going, and I'm particularly pleased that even though we haven't closed with Octo, we're still getting inbound inquiries from other people, which tells me that we've got something right. We've got the marketing right, we've got the structure right for helping third parties realise the tax losses, and that's really what it's all about. They will pay us a share of what they can recover from the tax losses. So we're pleased with how it's going.
Okay, yeah. So for you as ECR, it means cash into the bank effectively.
It literally does. The deal with Octo is that they would pay us $4.5 million Australian dollars for MGA. Now we will take projects out of MGA before we sell it. We have to sell it with some projects. We have tentatively specified Bayliston, which is one of our projects in central Victoria. The tax losses always travel with the company, and the tax losses are only usable if the company is an operating company, so you can't just sell it as a shell. And hence part of the complexity. But yes, we're pleased with how it's going. We're pleased with the inbound interest we're getting, and I'll continue to bite my fingernails and battle with the lawyers and battle with the other processes. But so far, so good.
Yeah, and as far as you're aware, it's still on track before the end of February, or by the end of February.
If it was not, we would have to make an announcement. And again, just to stress, it was Octo's proposal that it was the end of February, and we were happy to accept that. That was a sensible target to aim at.
Good. Perfect. Another question here: are rising gold prices prompting some increased third-party interest in ECR's projects?
I mean, yes. I suppose two answers to that. Actually, rising antimony prices are prompting a lot of interest in our operations. Now, I mentioned that Bayliston is the project that we've earmarked to sell as part of MGA with the Octo transaction. Bayliston has got quite an interesting antimony prospect where we've had a grade of up to 32%, having reprocessed previous drilling results. Antimony is up something like about 5 times in price over the last 12 months, and certainly I've actually looked at it today, but certainly last week it was continuing to rise. Antimony is becoming, I think, one of the most sought-after metalloids or resources in the world at the moment, and with Bayliston's 32% result, that's attracting quite a lot of inbound interest. Slightly different answer to the question that's asked. In terms of gold prices, I would probably answer it in reverse. We have been very interested in expanding ECR and looking at other opportunities. And what we're finding is that with rising gold prices, that's actually creating quite a lot more opportunity across the M&A space. We've seen a number of opportunities, some of which we've been fairly cautious about taking further. But as the price rises, that tends to free up a fair bit of M&A, which is certainly what we're interested in.
Okay, interesting. This question I see did pop up, and I think it does. It did cover. Let's put that back one just briefly. You effectively answered that question with the antimony, and that comes from Bayliston there, the tax losses. So
yeah, I mean it's a little bit of both. We're not going to be able to sell MGA unless we include a project. We like all of our projects, so at some point we have to part with one of our children if we're going to make MGA work. We selected Bayliston, which was a project that appealed to Octo at the time. Clearly, it appeals to other people given the interest in antimony. There's nothing to say anything can't be restructured, right up until the last minute. But clearly, we're not going to make a mess of what's already a complicated transaction. So we'll stick with Plan A for the time being, but let's see how we go.
Okay, good. And another question I saw popped up there: would ECR consider projects outside of Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. In the past, ECR has been very well travelled, and has looked at projects in the US, in Argentina. So we would not be the first management team to look elsewhere. I mean, as you observed earlier, we're not based in Australia, so if we were to find something else that was of interest and it wasn't in Australia, that would not be a prohibition against proceeding. Um, I, I think a fuller response would say it's really all about the project. We're not buyers just because we can buy. We're buyers because we think it would be beneficial to expand the company. If you run a small listed company, I mean, as you know, there's a certain amount of cost that goes with it. Whether you've got one project or 101 projects. So there is a benefit in expanding our business. We've had good support from investors. We've had some good inbound inquiries on a number of different things, and we will continue to examine those as we travel through the year. Um, same applied, by the way, last year. We didn't buy anything last year. We looked at a lot of things. We were quite cautious in how we approached some of the opportunities, but not without enthusiasm. And if we can find something that fits the portfolio well, and we think with our skills we can make it better, we'll absolutely look to expand the business,
Okay,
irrespective of whether it's in Australia or elsewhere.
good. Okay, well, there's probably some good opportunities as well, I would say, given the maybe not gold projects with the price of gold, but other commodities maybe that are not as in favour yet. So I'm sure there's a few things crossing your desk. Where where is Mike tonight? He was good value last time.
I couldn't say. He's probably watching the football, perhaps. I'm not sure.
I would hope he'd be watching this. But
I don't know.
yeah.
I'm always cautious about watching myself back, so perhaps he feels the same.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Potential. Here we go. Potential for niobium and tantalum at Lolworth. Would you be drilling these targets as well?
I mean, yes. I mean, the primary target is gold.
Yeah.
What we have with the rare earths is we have two partnerships, one with James Cook University and one with the Geological Survey of Queensland. Those are both announced in the sort of second half of last year. What both of those do is they give us a little bit of a free pass at examining the rare earth potential in Lolworth. What we've found in the past is where we've been sampling primarily for gold, we've also picked up some quite interesting results for these other minerals. I would expect that to continue. We'll
Okay.
see how we go with the drilling, but I would certainly expect that to continue. But I think it would be careless of us not to allow the GSQ and also James Cook to lead the way on that, given their expertise and given bluntly they're paying for it.
Okay. Good. Let's see if there's any other questions here. Is Brewing Lane property over the line yet? Is that the land sale, isn't it?
We have some surplus land in Victoria which we're selling. We are very, very nearly there.
Okay. I think Nick may have just temporarily frozen. Sorry, Nick. Yeah, you said you just froze very briefly, but you said we're very, very nearly there.
We're very nearly there, other than the good bit was missed. The buyer had to carry out a survey. Essentially, they're getting a mortgage to buy the land. The land is residential, by the way. I mean, this is the odd thing about one of my predecessors buying the land. It's zoned as residential, so the buyer is essentially getting what is akin to a mortgage. The surveyor has been out. They're given the tick in the box, and I'm expecting it to complete very, very soon.
Okay, good stuff. Oh, here we go. Nick's gold prediction for the end of 2025. I think you missed Ryan's prediction because you probably weren't online at that time. And Ryan, I think from memory, said he thinks it would go to maybe 300, but then pull back and maybe pull back to 27 and maybe settle around. Basically, I think it was settling around 3,100. I think was his prediction by year end.
I think that sounds pretty credible. Gold tends to respond well when there's a lot of problems in the world, and we seem to have a lot of problems just now. My prediction would be above 3,000 by the end of the year. I could see it sort of running away and then pulling back a little bit, but we will become quite interested in the gold price once we start producing at Blue Mountain.
Sure.
Our own forecasts sit quite somewhere below that. So if we got above 3,000, I'd be very pleased. I think our shareholders would be as well.
Okay, good. Do you have an update on what's happening at the Tambo project following the results that were back in December, I think?
Yeah, we carried out a maiden drilling program, or maiden diamond drilling program at Tambo in the latter half of last year. The results sort of came hole by hole. So the lab we used was maybe a little bit slower than we would have liked in terms of producing the results. We put out a series of announcements. What we were looking to prove was the scale of the potential gold showings below a historic mine. Again, Tambo is another property where we have historic workings. The drilling results have demonstrated that mineralization continues down at depth. We've begun to form a model as to where we think that mineralization sits. The next stage would be a further drilling campaign. I think it's probably fair to say that in our sort of list of priorities, Queensland is trumping Victoria just at the moment, just given you're always going to focus on where you think the best opportunities are, and Blue Mountain is a standout opportunity, with Lolworth in second place. That is not to be interpreted as we're not impressed with Tambo. We were absolutely delighted. The drilling campaign did exactly what it was meant to do, and the next stage would be to do a more fulsome campaign. So that's certainly something we'll be looking at in the latter part of this year, I suspect.
Okay.
But as I say, Queensland is probably the focus in the near term.
Okay. And in terms of you're fairly well funded, I think, aren't you, for all activities, at least for this year?
We are fully funded for all of our activities in the ground for 2025. We did a placing or a subscription back at the end of last year, and that covers our costs for everything we have planned. So, so we're sitting in a pretty good position. And if we can get into revenue with Blue Mountain towards the end of the year, we'll be very pleased indeed.
Yeah, good. I think looking at companies at the moment who are pre-cash going into cash, such as yourselves, also Silver Bullet, Fulcrum perhaps a little bit further down away, but that's where I think a lot of the institutions are looking now. Anyway, talking to certainly Gervais at Premier Miton, looking at companies that are going pre-cash to cash that are undervalued in this space at the moment, where valuations are pretty low.
Yeah, Gervais has said exactly the same to me, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, small cap resources companies, historically we find things and then we try and pass them on or sell them on. Breaking the mold, as we're seeking to do by becoming revenue generating, covering all of our cash costs, which is certainly what Blue Mountain can do if it performs as we expect. That would be a fantastic position for ECR to be in, and a complete game changer from our rather extensive history.
Yeah, and like we said about breaking the mold, I'm sort of seeing it a bit more. Maybe people have got fed up of the state of the markets. It's like we have to do something different. I don't know. Maybe it's a changing of the landscape, get into cash flow. I don't know, but I'm seeing more companies starting to do that. I think that's really key. Gervais, he's not is he a shareholder? Do you know? Can we disclose that? I don't know.
He is not a shareholder as far as I know. I mean, certainly Premier Miton are not a shareholder, but
right.
I've known Gervais for quite some time.
Okay.
In my investment banking days, I used to take clients along to see him, and I'll continue to talk. And his mantra is exactly as you described. That inflection point where a company goes from pre-cash to generating cash. His view is that is where revenue is. Where the valuation is likely to increase at the sharpest rate, and I couldn't agree more. And it's exactly what we're looking to achieve this year.
Okay. Well, next time I speak to Gervais, I will ask him if ECR is indeed on his radar. But,
and if not, why not?
Yeah, precisely. Precisely. Well, thank you, Nick. So we're nicely on time to just come back for a bit of a round table discussion. So I'm going to bring back our other